right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Crypto 101 podcast. Couldn't be more excited today. Brendan and I have been trading these markets very actively, and it's always good when the markets go up and to the right. Brendan, how are you doing today, dude?
Hey, it's like you said, doing great. The markets are going up and to the right, and we got a familiar guest today, someone who we really love talking to over here, someone who's pioneering the space. Couldn't be any happier.
Seriously. Matt Hogan, CIO, Chief Investment Officer of Bitwise, joining us today. Mr. Hogan, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. As you said, markets up and to the right. We're here to talk crypto. What could be better? It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Yeah, last time we spoke was like right early April. I think Bitcoin was right around 63,000. Here we are, mid-November. Bitcoin's 90,000. What has changed? What has changed to get us to where we're at and broken out of the range? And if your one answer for this is the whole episode, there's a lot that's changed. But
there you go. Yeah, no, a lot has changed. I mean, I think it's impossible to overstate the change that happened as a result of the November election, right? Mm-hmm. You've obviously seen that be the primary driver of price, but I would argue it's just a tiny down payment on where we're going. The crypto industry faced severe headwinds for the last 4 years. Sure, the market was up. We were up 400% before the election. That's pretty good over a 4-year period. But we were facing regulatory lawfare. We were facing difficulty accessing primary banking services. We were facing a regulatory cloud that kept institutions and professionals out of the market. And that's all been swept away. Now all those headwinds have become tailwinds. We have a pro-crypto White House, a pro-crypto Congress. We're going to get pro-crypto administrators at the SEC. The U.S. might buy 1 million Bitcoin. I mentioned we have a government agency named after a meme coin. I mean, it's sort of wild to think the change that we've gone through. And I really think the move, as exciting as it's been from 63 to 90, is just a down payment on where we're going.
I love it. I think you're exactly right. It's just early innings still, because now we have, nation state sort of game theory starting to play out when you have these conversations and Senator Loomis proposing this Bitcoin strategic reserve, and all these other countries are going to want to front run the U.S. Gov, right? And they're going to say, well, if they're going to do it, or if they're even thinking about it, there's going to be other countries that are bigger that are going to be doing it. So we already see maybe half a dozen countries already starting to accumulate with their central banks. I know Bhutan and some countries in Africa are doing this. Could you tell us about how sort of nation states are thinking about adapting now? And if we think of this as a global chessboard, America makes their move. What is the game theory actually afoot here, and how big can it kind of get?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. The fundamental problem is that people already own 19.7 million of the 21 million Bitcoin that will ever exist. That's a fundamental challenge. So as you have governments around the world looking to position themselves in this asset, they have to buy it from other people. And we sort of do have a proxy for what this looks like, right? Governments own 20 to 25% of the gold that exists around the world. So if we assume that we're going to get to that stage of maturity, governments have to own 4 or 5 million Bitcoin. Where are they going to get them from? Right? We won't mine the next million Bitcoin for another 100 years. So they have to find 4 or 5 million Bitcoin from existing holders. And the only way that happens if the price goes up dramatically. I just don't see any other way for that to play out. Now, it's possible that this global game theory won't happen. It's possible that everyone will sort of collectively agree not to do this. The problem is, it's a classic tragedy of the commons for these global governments. From maintaining their own individual fiat currencies, they're probably all better if no one allocates to Bitcoin. But if you're the first mover and then other people do, the advantage is so massive to you that I think it's going to force everyone to do it. So I think we're going to see, potentially an arms race to get exposure to this asset. And again, there's just nowhere to get it from, right? There's just no more Bitcoin. And I think that's a real challenge.
Yeah, this is a point that I was talking to Galaxy and Wisdom Tree about last week. And they brought it up to me and they said, hey, if we get a Bitcoin strategic reserve, if that's really going to happen, you have to think about the domino effect that comes along with that, because it wouldn't just be the United States adopting a Bitcoin reserve and everyone else just goes, okay, nothing's going to change. Every other country would start to see Bitcoin as an asset. They would need to be holding it. It would kind of solidify its place. And then you'd have countries all over the world that would be essentially almost forced to have some sort of Bitcoin adoption or some sort of Bitcoin reserve, maybe bigger, maybe less. And, we've already just started to see BRICS talk about this. And they've mentioned this idea of doing similar things. And so I think that if the United States does it, other countries has to do it. And then if other countries start to do it and the United States, then it starts to become a global standard. If it's a global standard, then companies have to bring Bitcoin onto their balance sheet.
Bingo.
Just like they do with like treasuries and bonds and all these other things. And then before you know it, you have countries and the biggest companies and all of institutional side, and then you already have retail, and then it's just a domino effect that continues to add up. And it's like you said, there is a set amount of Bitcoin, all of which is around, right, of the 19 million that we have right now. A bunch of that is lost. That reduces the supply.
Good point.
More of that is being put into these long-term cold wallets. That's reducing the supply more. So where is the Bitcoin going to come from, right? For these governments and for these institutions, if they do adopt this. And I think that what that would invoke is the most basic laws of supply and demand, and that if demand skyrockets, if supply gets cut and demand skyrockets, then that would just do wonders. And so the prediction that those guys gave me from Wisdom Tree and Galaxy is they said, if this happens, we could see $1 million Bitcoin.
Easy. I love that. I agree with that completely. And I know for some people out there, that sounds ridiculous. I would argue that the ridiculous things that Bitcoin had to do to get to the point where it is today have already happened.
Yeah.
Like the network had to launch. It had to work. It needed uptime. There could be no fraudulent transactions, right? It had to get over these hurdles. It had to have boom and busts and recovery. It needed institutional adoption. It needed an ETF to launch. It needed a pro-crypto government to come into the US with a mandate for change. It needed all of these things. The things that you described, Brendan, are like small steps. Right, pretty logical small steps that we have to go from here. I think the highest hurdles have already been cleared. That doesn't guarantee that it will happen, of course, but there are a lot of arguments that push us in this direction. And I do think whether you want to describe it as global game theory, whether you want to describe it as like a Pascal's wager, where the cost of doing it is low and the upside is nearly infinite, there are all these reasons to believe maybe it's 30% likely, maybe it's 50% likely, maybe it's 70% likely, and it does lead to $1 million Bitcoin or more. I think it's
or
really
more. And the story extends now well beyond Bitcoin. Bitwise has a slew of incredible crypto products. We could talk in depth about each one, but it's now extended beyond Bitcoin. And we see Ethereum, Solana, and the whole other sort of cohort of cryptos. Do you think that institutions are warming up to not just Bitcoin? Like Bitcoin's got its place. We all think that's pretty secure. We know that the trajectory of this. We kind of know the idea is digital gold. But do you think that the institutions and you could kind of cut the institutions several different ways. There's the banks and the wirehouses. There's the hedge funds. There's the pensions and stuff. But do they start to see the future now, maybe in light of this new administration, that there is going to be a world in which these decentralized markets start to proliferate?
Absolutely. The same exact change that we're all discussing about Bitcoin, from it going from a renegade idea to something mainstream that's being held by institutional investors and central governments, the same change is taking place on programmable blockchains. The same change is taking place with DeFi, with stable coins, with tokenization. Those were all sort of ideas, but traditional finance was completely excluded from them or worried about sticking their finger in the water 3 months ago. Now, all that's being removed. You're even seeing things. There's a little followed news story last week, but BlackRock, which already has a tokenized money market fund on Ethereum, expanded it to